Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Jawad Yaqub, and today we are here to review the 2026 Australian Grand Prix, the start of a new Formula One season. And joining me today, we have a trio of Grid Talk co-hosts, as well as Monkey Seats, Tom Horrox, hello,
Hello.
and Grid Talk co-host Ruby Price, and Grid Talk co-host as well, Owain Medford.
Hello.
And let's get into this. And let me quickly have a little bit of a sob because it was not the day for Oscar Piastri, who crashed on the reconnaissance lap to the grid at turn four, breaking the hearts of many Australian fans who would have thought that the curse would have been broken. But alas, it was not, though we had such a intriguing race, didn't we? And we'll come to you first, Ruby. Mercedes 1-2 finish, confirming the favourite tags that they've had on them right through the pre-season. Even in practice, they didn't want to give their cards away, but in qualifying, George Russell really laid down the gauntlet, and their victory in this race, their 1-2 finish with Kimi Antonelli, confirmed that they are really going to be the team to beat.
Yeah, those sandbags truly came off during qualifying, didn't they? There was obviously so much. Will Mercedes be the team that we're expecting them to be? So much hype around the powertrain, and then we get to qualifying, and yes, George Russell sets a qualifying lap time good enough for pole that is 8/10 of a second ahead of the next non-Mercedes driver. Truly looking back at like some 2014 levels worth of pace for the Mercedes out the front. And then we obviously got into the race, and whilst George lost the lead off the start, he was in a position to be able to keep fighting with that, and had a very good fight with Charles Leclerc, and then Lewis Hamilton joined the picture as well, and we'll get to obviously what happened in that regard. But I also just need to acknowledge the tyre saving, or at least making the tyres last that Mercedes did, because we were all convinced it was going to be a two-stop for Mercedes when they made that early stop under the VSC, and there was a part of me that was like, I do kind of want to see them do this, because it will at least let us see, if they come out and they're behind Ferrari, can they put that pace in to catch up with the field? But, once again, George Russell just making those tyres last, and, it's a 1-2, their first since the 1950s that didn't involve Lewis Hamilton. And yeah, Mercedes, you can't really knock that they are potentially the favourites for the rest of this season, based off today at the very least.
Indeed, they are. And behind them, 15 seconds, 15.5 seconds behind the leading duo was Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. And Tom, will come to you. Leclerc had a really, really close battle with Russell in the opening laps. I mean, in the preseason, we heard about Ferrari potentially being better with their getaways and start procedure, the unique start procedure we have for these new generation of cars. And indeed, he did lead into the first corner, but in typical Ferrari fashion, it seems, they did not pit either Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton under the virtual safety car that came out at a critical point in the race. Do you think, while Ferrari may have had that early race pace, do you think they threw it away with strategy?
I don't think they threw the race win away. I will say that. But when you look at the way the race went and the way things panned out, it was a risk to not stop. And by not stopping, or by not stopping and continuing, they were putting it into the lap of the gods, hoping for Martin Brundle's prediction pre-race of if you don't finish in the top, if you finish the race, you're going to be in the points. I thought, no, ridiculous. That's not going to happen. The amount of laps they were doing in pre-season, of course, most cars are going to make. Yes, we're going to have some people breaking down, but there's no way we're going to have 12 retirements or 10 after the non-starters. So I thought, no, there's no way are we going to have a everyone scoring point situation here. So barring safety cars, they really were putting it in the lap of the gods for that to happen. Now, you saw the situation with the first safety car. they they missed an opportunity, or they thought we've got to do something different. But Leclerc was in a fight with George Russell. He led for 24 laps, which is nearly half distance, just under half distance of the race. So, he's led a very good spell of the race there. Now he's shown that in battle, he pretty much didn't have George Russell covered, but he was able to fight with him, and that in turn brought Lewis Hamilton into the fray. Antonelli was just joining the fight as well. So it was then a four-way fight, and in a four-way fight, there's a 50-50 chance that your guys are going to come out on top. All that happened by Ferrari taking that pit stop, it meant that Mercedes could run the rest of the race at the pace that they wanted to go at, not the pace where Leclerc was restricting Russell, and then Russell was trying to get by, and then Leclerc was using his battery to get ahead again. We all know that Albert Park is not the easiest place to overtake and very difficult for energy saving, so the cars were going to be energy starved and running in a compromised state. So this was a golden opportunity for Ferrari to take the fight to Mercedes over a race distance, and I think by not stopping, they've taken that option away and allowed Mercedes to do what they wanted to do, whereas they felt in a difficult position before that. So I don't think it would have made a vast difference at the end, because I think that if they had stopped, potentially George may have got ahead in those stops, or if they hadn't have got ahead, the pace was such that Mercedes probably would have just done an additional stop, or would have done something, because they had the gap. There was the gap to go into. They had the pace. They would have at least switched the strategy. Maybe Antonelli would have come in. There would have been the pincer movement. We've seen Mercedes through the fights with Red Bull and Ferrari in the 2010s and early 2020s, that they're very sharp on that kind of thing. They haven't been able to do it for a couple of years because they haven't had the car, but they are still operationally sharp in that department. When it comes to pincer movements and team play, Mercedes, there's no one better than them. So I don't think it would have changed the result. I do think that potentially they've got a 2-3 they've missed out on there, or a 2-4. So I think they haven't optimized, but it is, yes, same old Ferrari, I'm afraid, not being nimble enough on their feet. Had the great start, which shows, if that's going to be the teams can't rebuild their turbos in 6 months, so that's going to be a baked-in advantage all year. I think Russell said in the post-race, what's going to become the George Russell podcast after the race, I think he said everyone else got a terrible start, which looked to be the case. So I think the teams will get better at that. So Ferrari really do need to make hay while they have this starting advantage. So that definitely helped. But I don't think that I just don't think it's a situation where they were likely to win the race anyway. They've just got to hope that they can stick with them and be a bit sharper in future. The second safety car, they had the opportunity. They had about 20 seconds to get Leclerc in, about 25 to get Hamilton in, and they didn't before the pit lane closed. Maybe they were going to do it next lap. We'll never know. But either way, it was two missed opportunities there.
100%. And yeah, Lewis saying on the team radio as well that they should have at least pitted one of them in those opportunities. So you'd hope that, like you say, with the advantages that they have with the turbo at the moment and the rocket starts they could potentially make early on in the season, that they go on and convert a couple of them, but also 100% on the fact that Mercedes is still as operationally sharp as ever. And yeah, quickly on the George Russell podcasting, fun fact, he was the first one into the post-race press conference, and he was rather eager to get it started without the other two drivers coming in. So maybe he wants it to be the George Russell podcast this season. Tom Clarkson even quipped that, wait till this could be a dress rehearsal for Abu Dhabi when you do the champions press conference. So we're already naming Russell as world champion. But let's move it down a little bit and look at some lovely stories throughout the weekend as well. It's not all doom and gloom, let's say. And Audi, we've been talking about on this podcast for a long time. And finally, they were able to hit the track in anger as the Works Audi team. And as well, I want to point out the rookie Arvid Lindblad as well in his first ever F1 weekend, the only rookie on the field too. We'll start with Audi though, Owain. Gabby Bortoletto said after the race that if you had told him before the weekend that he would get a Q3 as well as a points finish, he would have told you that you were drunk. How do you feel about that result for this team, which, to be fair, in the preseason predictions, we would have had the likes of Alpine ahead of them and the likes of Williams ahead of them, but Gabby went out and got a better result.
Yeah, it turns out I had a bit of a crisis of confidence, really. Yeah, you look at the kind of the existing power unit manufacturers that are out there, and some of them seem to have done a bit of a worse job. It's not plain sailing for Audi. Let's not forget that Bortoleto conked out just at the end of Q2, going into the pit lane, so wasn't able to complete Q3. That's why he started in 10th. But as a off the back of that, he's still done a great job. And there have been sort of numerous drivers who you might have expected, maybe particularly with. I know that it's still the sort of bones of Sauber in there, but bolstered by Audi's own works engine project, which does grant you certain advantages if it does come with the disadvantage of only supplying one team. But they seem to have done a really good job with the car. And at least around this circuit, they seem to have been able to put together solid laps. I mean, it's not, they were obviously early in some of these runs in qualifying at least, but we're able to put down really respectable times before obviously being beaten by the class of the field. But either way, across the whole race, it does seem that they've not just built a car that's good at qualifying, they have built one that they can race, and that's what Bortoleto was able to do. It's a bit unfortunate that Hulkenberg wasn't able to take the start, so there's clearly some issues there. But you'd expect that, and they're hardly the worst of issues of what we've seen throughout this weekend, and probably will see throughout the weekend, throughout the Grand Prix to come. So as a result of that, yeah, I think they've done a great job, and Bortoleto should be proud of himself for being able to pull that out of the bag, because he's got really, really high up there for what is kind of it's basically a new engine project, which as we know is not necessarily plain sailing, but clearly they've done something right, managed to get the sort of package together. Lindblad is even more of a surprise, I would say. Bearing in mind where he qualified, it was pretty good. But Lawson sort of slipped down the order, and you would kind of expect the rookie and Lindblad to do the same, but he really didn't. He was fighting at times with the Red Bulls, and not making things easy, which I was surprised to see. I thought he would maybe not jump out of the way, but make things a little bit easier. It was only kind of later in the Grand Prix, when there was a bit more of a tire offset, that Verstappen was able to sort of power past Lindblad. A part of it is that Lawson sort of got a really quite bad start, which is something that I think all the teams need to sort out. Like we seem to be having a number of teams going to the grid and not having their batteries in the right place, which I don't really understand. If that's the sort of thing that I thought would have been absolutely sorted. Getting the car on the grid with basically a full battery, if that's possible in the regulations. But apart from that, he still did a great job, and over not the easiest of Grand Prix. I mean, a couple of VSCs, and he still executed what was a fairly solid strategy really well, and he's walked away with points of it, which for a rookie is obviously it's kind of the Lewis Hamilton way of doing things back in 2007. Having a pretty good start, obviously not in the quite as a performer at the team, but still doing an absolutely great job. So I think he can walk away from this Grand Prix, with his head held high.
And fun fact, you mentioned 2007. Well, that was the year Arvid Lindblad was born. So take that little fact whichever way you want to. But 5-star performances from both those drivers and their teams. And speaking of 5-star performances, if you enjoy this podcast, we would love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you are listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and subscribe. So moving it on, and I think this is where we get into the bit of a doom and gloom part of the weekend. And Ruby, Aston Martin. Now, it started off as we thought that they would potentially do an outlap and then retire from the race, or not even make it to the race itself. Would they qualify in the 107% rule or not? But they actually did end up, doing all of that and respectably, which is setting the bar quite low. Lance Stroll completed more than half the race distance. I mean, I thought it was after 15 laps, he said that he would be electrocuted, and after 25 laps, Fernando Alonso would have permanent nerve damage, but they seem to have logged more laps than that, even though both were not classified. Alonso said after the race that, yeah, China, they've got the same car and the same engine and same battery. Yeah, do you want to perhaps just, yeah, take the floor and share your thoughts on the mess that is Aston Martin? Because this team that has invested so much money and has Adrian Newey as the team principal and managing technical partner, you would have thought that they'd hit the ground running during this new regulation era.
I mean, yeah, they were setting themselves up so much to be the superpower of this 2026 regulation. Fernando Alonso was going to be the world champion come the end of the year, having not won a race for the last 13, 14 years. I'm not entirely sure on it. But I will make a slight correction on you. Lance Stroll did not manage to set a lap within 107% rule. And I don't think he set a lap within the 107% rule this entire year so far. And I think it epitomises the situation of Aston Martin, where they were having to request permission to allow Lance Stroll to take part in the race. And I think what actually happened today kind of should illustrate why maybe the 107% rule should actually be applied, because Lance Stroll did not make it hasn't done a single full-length race distance so far this year. One of the arguments that Aston Martin used in order to convince the stewards that Lance should be on the grid today was that Fernando Alonso managed to set a lap within that 107% rule. His car will be able to make it through the race. It didn't. It made it 14 laps before having 15 minutes on the sidelines whilst Aston Martin presumably charged the batteries in that car, took them out, stuck them in the AV units for just a little bit and, put it back out to get some more track time. Lance did make it to lap 36 before he had to retire, took some time out and then came back out again. And I just think it's a little bit laughable that you can argue that your car is deserving of a position in the race when you can't make it through 15 laps with one of your cars before you have to retire or risk permanent nerve damage to your drivers. Of course, that might not have actually been the case that's happened, but at the same time, I think it is a little bit embarrassing that a team valued at over $2 billion is struggling so much. And they have at least managed to get some more track time on the board. They used the Australian Grand Prix very much like a pre-season testing, and with not that much time to go between now and the Chinese Grand Prix, I can't imagine that we're going to see too much more when it comes to the Chinese Grand Prix performance, particularly as well given the length of that straight. But we'll talk about that when we get to our preview for the Chinese Grand Prix. In terms of Australia, I think they'll be glad to see the back of it. They've got some more data. They at least have got some more running. But I just think it's just a little bit embarrassing for a team that were shouting, to the rooftops that they were the next big thing. And I miss Force India, I'll just say that now.
I'll move it over to Tom now. Does this situation give you nasty flashbacks of 2015 and when McLaren also entered their partnership with Honda? Is there any similarities with the way management is dealing with this? I mean, even though there's no Ron Dennis at Aston Martin, Martin Whitmarsh was there, who also signed the deal for McLaren back to get the engines in 2015, and whether there's tension on the side of, the chassis and the engine. I mean, yeah, is it a bad nightmare that we're reliving again?
It certainly does give flashbacks, but I wouldn't use the word bad. I'm quite enjoying it, to be honest. It's and like you say, as Ruby said, with everything that was going on, I do genuinely feel bad for Alonso. But I also feel like what was it he said when Jolyon Palmer got a penalty after oh no, he retired after he pushed Alonso off the track. Karma, I think he said. Yeah, I do feel bad for him, but if you behave like the way that he has done over the years, then you've got to expect for something to come back on you on there. But I mean, his talent, let's be honest, his talent has been wasted in F1. He should be at least a four-time world champion, in my opinion. Don't think any more than that. Some people claim he should be an eight-time or a 10-time world champion. Check yourself. You're talking rubbish. But no, he should at least be a four-time world champion, maybe even a five. And unfortunately, that's just the decisions you make. And the bad luck he's had has led to that situation. But it's not just a Honda problem, though. There's so much that's gone wrong with that whole thing. The 2015 argument, definitely. I was thinking more like 2017 initially because the parallels to what Honda did very similar, but it has got worse. Whereas at least the 27 McLaren situation had a steady, gradual improvement, just not quick enough. Ironically, for Fernando Alonso, who pushed for them to get Renault power, which probably in hindsight may well have cost McLaren a championship eventually, because they could have been the team in 2020 2021 fighting Mercedes if they'd have stuck with Honda, because as we saw, they would have got there in the end. So yes, it is definitely flashbacks in that side of things, but it's not just the Honda system. There's the hybrid elements, their gearboxes causing all kinds of problems, which incidentally is completely designed and manufactured by the Aston Martin team. Their limited mileage in testing, which is I think just over 2,000 kilometers they did, is just insanely low. And they can't develop the car because they don't know how good the car is. I'm not entirely sure how Adrian Newey can claim that they have the fifth best chassis on the grid, but at least he's not done a Ron Dennis and said we have the best chassis on the grid when clearly they didn't. But like, there's no way of knowing because they can't develop the car. They're bringing loads of new parts to the car, but apparently they were developing the car for the 3-4 months before Newey came along. But then Newey just said, "No, throw that in the bin. We're not doing that." So, like, I know he couldn't have started working until that deadline, but maybe like a message could have got to them, just been like, no, don't do that, just don't do that. They've wasted this development, they've wasted this time, they've wasted money, and they're not going to recover. It's going to take years. It's a sorry state of affairs, and I don't think that I was very surprised. I actually quickly fact checked your fact there, Ruby, about the Lance Stroll thing, and you were absolutely correct. I thought no, he must have, but no, he didn't. Not even a single lap in 107%. That's shocking. Cadillac can do it. They didn't have an entry 12 months ago. Cadillac can do it. So Aston Martin, you need to sort yourself out. Don't just blame Honda. Yes, there are problems specifically with Honda, but it's the Aston Martin, the whole operation. You need to sort yourself out. You've not done your due diligence. You've signed with an engine partner that decimated their engine program, and you've underestimated the challenge. So, I think I'll pass on to Owain. I'll pass back to you, Jawad, to pass to Owain if he wants anything else to say.
Well, now that you mentioned Cadillac, I actually want to touch on Cadillac, if that's okay, Owain. And, we think back more than 12 months before they had the entry approved. There was all this hoo-ha from, the existing teams that, Cadillac would bring zero value to the sport. Yet what they proved over the weekend, even if, Bottas DNF'd and Perez finished 3 laps off the lead lap, is that they have the foundations to actually be a solid professional team that could potentially bring that value to the sport. I mean, yeah, I rate Cadillac more than Aston Martin at the moment, but how do you feel about that sentiment?
I mean, I think Cadillac are doing. They're it's a tale of two sort of teams, really. Cadillac have sort of the whole way along. We've seemed to think that they've done everything kind of in the right way. At least taking the sort of strategically lowest risk path. They didn't go, "Oh, we're going to have our own engine program day one." They've got the Ferrari engine in the back, so I don't know the exact cause of Bottas's DNF and the reason that he stopped, but it is most likely power unit. I can't remember who they're getting their gearboxes off, but I would imagine it's probably Ferrari. That's not their problem, to be honest with you. It's the way that they it's the way that they've gone and done it. They've brought the power unit in, which is the smart way to do it. Say what you want about Ferrari, they will build a functional power unit, and they won't decimate their engine program just because of the structure of their team. They've also gone and got drivers who are not going to put it into the wall, and I think that Perez showed that he's clearly not lost none of the racing spirit. Rightly or wrongly, say what you want about that defense. I believe against was it Colapinto?
Lawson.
Oh, sorry, Lawson. I apologize. But it was certainly robust. And yeah, it did cause them some damage a bit later on, which funnily enough, Ferrari didn't take advantage of. But but they still have gone about this entire project in seemingly the right way. They have an engine project that they're building up, but you know what? They're not doing what Honda seem to have done twice now, might I add, which is start a year late and end up well off the pace. Yeah, it's kind of where one team seem to have gone, well, we have, we've got the budget, we've got the facilities, we've got everything. It seems to be the difference between known knowns and known unknowns, and Cadillac seem to have gone about this entire project of just like, we know what we don't know. We know it's going to be hard. We're going to minimize the risk on all the parts that we have to. And bearing in mind that Formula One is a business at the end of the day. All of these teams are businesses. That is an important thing that you have to take into account. And it just seems that they have made the correct business decisions to allow them to thrive in the business that they are in. Whereas Aston Martin have not done that. And I think the performance from the two is plain as day to see. Yes, they're 3 laps off the pace, but they will, they will improve. And they've made their job significantly easier because they're going to get all of the engine performance improvements, apart from the deployment, for free. And in terms of that, I think they're in a much better place than Honda seemed to. Well, Aston Martin Hondas seem to be at this point in time. Yeah, I mean, I think Cadillac are doing a great job, and they are a credit to Formula One in a way that Aston Martin Honda aren't, which is ironic given the original rejection of Cadillac at those early talks.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, well, let's move it on to the final point then. And there's a lot that's been said in this first weekend about the new regulation of cars, particularly engine side of things, the 50-50 power split between ICE and the hybrid. And I'm just going to read off some quotes for you guys that you would have kept up to date with through the weekend. So Max Verstappen said he's not having fun. Lando Norris, the reigning world champion, said that they've gone from the best cars in F1 ever to the worst. And Ollie Behrman said today, that's not racing, that's Formula E in regards to how the battery and overtake mode works. Now, we'll start with you, Ruby. Share your thoughts, please, on what you thought on this first weekend of Formula One's new era.
Yeah, I mean, I've had honestly a lot of fun watching today's Australian Grand Prix. Like, because of scheduling, I've not really had too much chance to be up to date with free practice and qualifying whilst it's been taking place. But in terms of the actual racing itself, I think it's been very good. In the first period before the VSC, we had 7 changes of lead in the first 10 laps. Think about how often we've had that before this era of regulations. Normally it's been a case of so-and-so gets out, ahead out of the DRS window by the end of lap 1 or 2, and then we never see the leader again, apart from whenever there's another safety car or a red flag, or when they're pitting, or when the race finishes. Think about how often we actually saw the lead driver having to do something today. It's refreshing to see. Yeah, there's a bit of things to be working out, cars decelerating by the time they reach the end of the straights, and of course we've got China coming up next, and that straight is obviously something to consider. And I think whilst we were having conversations, someone talked about the previous layout of Australia potentially being more suited to the current generation of cars, and that might be as it is. F1 has been trying to create the fastest F1 circuit for the last, however long Formula 1's existed, but it could be to its own detriment to an extent. But I'm very excited to see what comes. It's still early days, Formula One. I mean, words. As we got further through this race, we saw more teams able to understand where they should be deploying their battery, where they should be harvesting it, and I think that added to an element of the racing. Racing isn't just overtaking. There is strategy to it. Yeah, we don't want to see every overtake happening in the pit lane, but it's part and parcel of the modern generation of Formula One. The data's there, the teams are going to use it. You can't just get rid of that now. So why not make it so that now the drivers have to be much more involved in driving their car again?
Yeah, exactly. While the drivers didn't enjoy it, we did as spectators, certainly. Tom, what was your thoughts? I know you had quite a bit that you were keen to say regarding what you saw today and this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, like you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and technology has existed in Formula One since the dawn of time. And to say that this isn't Formula One, I mean, like to use other analogies, are we gonna go back to pigskin footballs in football? Are we gonna go back to like massive golf clubs? And this the sport. This is a technology based sport, and the sport has constantly evolved throughout the history of the sport. Every major rule change gets exactly the same reaction from fans and media. This isn't the real Formula One anymore. Well, history proves this every single time. Everything settles down, and then Formula One is now the strongest it's ever been. Just since I've been alive, 1989 turbos, when they banned that, lost its identity. This isn't my Formula One. The narrow track cars in 1998, groove tyres, widely criticised. Okay, not the biggest fan. Love the slick tyres to come back, but the racing was great. The racing was brilliant in the end. 2009, huge aero reset. What did we get? One of the best sporting history stories of all time with Brawn. And those cars, again, double diffusers, lots of controversy, lots of excitement. Yes, it led to the Sebastian Vettel dominance, but there was a lot of intrigue around that. The hybrids came in, too quiet, too complex, not real F1. Nah. No, I'm sorry, but this is the road relevance. This is what has pushed the manufacturers back into F1, and it's made the sport what it is now. 2022 ground effect as well. Porpoising complaints. Oh yeah, the cars are too heavy now. They're too big. Racing's going to be worse with these. What did we just have? One of the closest F1 seasons in history. I'm sorry, but the drivers. Lando Norris said it before the start of the season. Then when he realised he's not in the best car, he's changed his mind. Now I love Lando Norris. He is my favourite driver, but. So you said at the start of the season, if Max doesn't like it, he can retire. And now he's saying, oh, yeah, we're going from the best cars to the worst. Okay, well, that's fine. But you know what? You're being paid a ton of money to do something that anyone else on the planet would probably do for nothing. So you need to get over yourselves and just deliver the racing. The racing in that first stint was brilliant. Now, yes, I know there was a lot of racing where it was using a battery to overtake. But guess what? When people introduced wings, people used wings to overtake. I'm sorry, but it's the same thing. Yes, we're using something different to promote overtaking. But that is how the sport changes. Technology changes. Things come in which allow us to overtake better or worse. Yes, it's not perfect. Yes, things need to change. But I think like people just need to get over it, enjoy the product, because right now it's going to be chaos for about 6 months. Then the product's going to settle down, and then in a year's time, everyone's going to be fine. Chill out, everyone.
All I can hear in my head is friends that I know saying, "Bring back the V10s, bring back the V10s," because it's a conversation that keeps happening. But I definitely agree that we need to stop living in the past and embrace the future when it comes to technology. Owain, anything to add from your end?
Just for the most part, I just think that you've got to remember Formula One drivers are they're one of two things, which is they have the shortest long memories of anyone on the planet. That's just who they are as people. And that's that kind of puts to bed why Verstappen and Norris are saying the things that they are. And the other side of it is that I remember this going back years where there was a reduction in power, I think, and I think it might be in the V8 era, right at the end of there, and or changes to Sepang where it was slightly off camber in the last corner, and the drivers just want to drive quickly. That's all they want to do, and they want nothing in the way of that. So to a degree, I don't think you can not necessarily not trust, but you can't use their comments as your barometer for every single rule change that we should ever make. What this rule set does, it is going to promote the drivers who can handle the way that these power units work, because they seem to have been the easiest to get into to get into production. But as I said previously, they seem to have been a bit capricious when it comes to actually getting them to perform. And what that will promote is the teams and the drivers that can get a handle on these regulations and can use this set of regulations with the power unit and the overtake mode and all the different changes that we've made. It is going to promote the best drivers coming to the fore and getting the best out of the cars. That is what it will promote up and down the grid. And it will reward good engineering and good driving, and the drivers who have the ability to deal with that and deploy and who learn fast enough to be able to figure everything out. You get to the end of a rule set, and quite a lot of people in Formula One have figured out how to make the car go fast, because partially you are racing the rule set. That's what the formula part is. And I think you have to reset that every few years, just because it does get a bit boring as everyone figures it out. And we're in that early stage, as Tom said, we're in that early stage where no one likes that. You get used to what you haven't had before. To what you've had before, and people were used to ground effect in the same way that they were used to the cars of the 2017 rule change, and used to the ones before that, and used to the ones before that. And I think what that is that you're looking at, change is good, and we're seeing that change, and we will see a new set of drivers who can deal with this come to the fore, and ultimately, I think that this is a good thing. This will push the sport onwards, and is that not what we want to see? It doesn't matter how quick they are ultimately, as long as they're broadly the fastest cars on earth, which they still are, might I add. It's not an issue for me, because they could make this into Formula Libre and say, do what you want, and the cars would go 500 kilometers an hour around every bend, and we'd be complaining about, there's no racing because there's 5 miles of dirty air behind them and everyone's really spread out. Well, ultimately, this is what you have to do to have an entertaining product that actually gets eyes on the sport. And remember that fundamentally, this is a big billboard. This is 22 200-mile-an-hour billboards, and if no one's watching, then no one pays for it, and we all go home, and we don't, and 20,000 people go out of don't have a job. So ultimately, I just think that this is, kind of a bit sour grapes and a bit short and long memories, all coalescing into one. That's what's happened here. Yeah, I'm all in favor of this rule set. I've been having a great time with it.
I love the way you summed that up, and yes, change is good. And if you don't agree with that, get on the phone with Bernie Eccleston and see if he can do that breakaway series that's been talked about many, many years ago. Anyway, let's move it on and look at the driver of the day. Grid Talk's official driver of the day was Sir Lewis Hamilton, who, for the first time in a long time, looked like he could have potentially scored a podium. It would have been his first podium with Ferrari, but we're going to have to wait, alas, for that. But I'm going to come to each of you and ask who your driver of the day was. So, Ruby, please let us know who your driver of the day was.
It was a tricky one for me to think about who my driver of the day was, really. I ended up giving it to George Russell, because as soon as he was, in that position where he was controlling the race, I don't think he really made a single mistake. But of course, he did have a couple of lockups whilst he was fighting with Charles Leclerc. So I feel like he wasn't the obvious candidate until I was trying to make a decision. I do think Lewis had one of his best races that we've seen from him since probably last season's Silverstone Grand Prix. But at the same time, I don't think it was. I think he was let down more by Ferrari. Max Verstappen's another contender, but I won't steal all of the talking points, so I'll stick to George Russell. I think he has a lot of pressure on his shoulders, coming like being that lead Mercedes driver, and Kimi Antonelli's not too far behind him is a very refreshing thing to see as well. So yeah, George Russell, it would have been very easy for him whilst he's leading the race to just burn through his tires and have to put himself in a position where he has to try and win the race back again. But as soon as he was in control of this race, he was fully in control of this race and it became his victory to lose. So yeah, George Russell, my driver of the day for the Australian Grand Prix.
George Russell for Ruby, Tom?
Well, I went for Charles Leclerc because, for all the reasons that Ruby has said, were exactly the same for Charles Leclerc, except he had the control of the race taken away from him by a strategy blunder. So for me, it's Charles Leclerc for all the same reasons that Ruby said.
Okay, Charles Leclerc and Owain.
I went for probably somewhat surprisingly Max Verstappen. I think he did a great job from where he was on the grid. He had a few retirements ahead of him. Actually, no, I don't think they would have been ahead of him by that point, apart from Hadjar. But still, he did a great job and kind of showed why he's a four-time world champion. Obviously, he was kind of limited in where he could get to, bearing in mind that there are two teams that are fundamentally faster than him right now. Therefore, that's why Mercedes and the Ferraris are ahead of him. But I think he did a really good job from where he was on the grid and where he managed to end up shepherding the car to, particularly for a new power unit and a team that's still sort of finding its feet a little bit. I think they've done a great job.
Yes, indeed. He was the top placed Red Bull Powertrains / Ford driver in the field. So yeah, interesting. We all had different choices for driver of the day. So that's we'll see if that's a trend that continues this season. Now, the opportunity for everyone to plug something. Ruby, I mentioned that you are a wonderful part of the Grid Talk family and a co-host as well. What would you like to plug today?
I'd just like to mostly plug my social channels, really. If you want to hear anything more from me, you can find me on Instagram at Ruby Rose Price. I share a lot of opinions on things and try and generally just make the world a better place from the social media, which doesn't often happen. But, if you want some positivity or some political commentary, that's where you can find me.
Excellent. Now, Tom, I mentioned, as well as being a Grid Talk co-host, you are host of the Monkey Seat podcast, was it Grid Talk's dirty cousin or something like that? Please tell us more.
Yeah, that's the monocle we've adapted. Myself and my friend Carl just talking rubbish about Formula One, completely uncensored and very bad opinions from someone who knows nothing about racing, and then me who knows a little bit about racing. So yeah, it's good fun. It's a good laugh. And if you also want to hear me, you can just listen somewhere near the clouds. You'll hear me screaming at them because I'm an old man.
Yes, insert the Simpsons old man yells at cloud meme. We should maybe put that in some merchandise for this year. Anyway, before I get carried away, Owain, what would you like to plug?
I'd like to plug our Grid Talk Predictions League. I know I plug it every week, but I'd like to point out that my bold prediction came true. That Cadillac would finish in the constructors above Aston Martin by the end of the Australian Grand Prix when everything was shaken out. It wasn't, but it was also correct. I think it's quite bold given their budget. Yeah, either way, that's available on our Grid Talk social channels. That's available at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the app. That's at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the app.
Fantastic. Yeah, go check that out this season. It'll be an interesting competition. So Grid Talk as well is available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to race results. A big thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? Also, make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when each new weekly episode is released, and we will be back with more F1 content very soon, starting off with the Chinese Grand Prix preview as well. It's, everyone's already packing up and heading to Shanghai this evening, here on the ground in Melbourne. But from me and my co-host, thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast. Welcome back for another season of F1, and goodbye.